Is Filmington. With me, I have Andy. She blinded me with refractors. Also, JT Triple Crown 24. We are here to talk about the baseball card market heading into 2020, a new decade. We're going to be talking about a lot of the concerns, issues, triggers, just a lot of the various aspects that have evolved over the last decade. We're going to be weighing in on our viewpoints on the overall health of the sports card market, particularly looking at baseball. There's really three different ways you can cut risk. There is, with baseball cards, you have risk of individual players. Somebody gets hurt, maybe underperforms, maybe a fatal injury, perhaps. You also have the risk that is linked to the broader economy or the stock market. And then you have the third risk, which is what we're going to be spending most of our time today, and that is on the baseball card market itself. And the two fellows I have with me, Andy and JT here, they have a lot of experience collecting, buying, and even selling baseball cards from the modern market. So Andy has been doing it since he was about 8 years old. JT has been doing it for quite some time too, as has myself. All right, so let's get started. This is going to be interactive. The first topic that I wanted to bring up has to do with print runs. So there has been a steady increase over the last decade, really since 2009, 2010, in print runs from Topps, especially probably over the last 3 or 4 years, even more so. What do you guys think about the print runs of Topps products today, and even the overall amount of products that's created by Topps today? Starting with you, Andy.
Well, I mean, like you said, the print runs have increased over the last couple of years. And I mean, there's a couple of different ways you could look at it. Like, I think it's a good thing because it shows that there are more people that are in the hobby that are able to support those print runs. I can also see the long-term effects, like as a person that collected back in the 80s and the 90s, some of that stuff that was so overproduced, it didn't really retain a lot of its value. And just to kind of put it in perspective, 91 Donruss, you look at that, a product like that, the big hits in that were the Elite Series cards. Those were numbered to 10,000, and you could go literally cases without hitting one of those. I never actually hit one of those. And, you look at today's market, if you pull the card that was numbered to 10,000, I mean, nobody's even going to think that's anything special at all. But I mean, I think it's a legitimate concern. And I would like to see them at a certain point, probably, and when I say a certain point, I would say now, kind of level that print run off. And it would be awesome too if they would let us know the print runs without us having to figure it out on our own.
What about you, JT? What do you think?
I think the biggest impact of this is just going to be the continual devaluation of the base card. Because if you look at a lot of the long-running products that have been going on, we'll take Topps Flagship and Topps Update, for example. I did a little research study, whatever you want to call it, recently to see what are your odds of pulling a Mike Trout Black from an Update pack and a Ronald Acuna Jr. pack. And the odds to pull the Acuna are actually 1 in 10,000 times harder than the Mike Trout Black rookie. So what that means is that there's actually a smaller checklist between 2011 and 2018 Update, and Series 1 and Series 2, it's a little bit larger. But that means that there's being more and more of it produced where a lot of these parallels are getting tougher to pull. So in a lot of cases, you're seeing maybe the autographs aren't as hard to get, but a lot of these parallels. So Andy mentioned there's some similarities to the 90s. I see that as well, where it's going to probably devalue a lot of the base cards except for the key rookies. But at the same time, the parallels and the tough inserts, the value of those will definitely rise. And I think that's something that's applicable to not only baseball, but football and basketball too.
Very well said. I would agree with a lot of what you guys said. I probably differ with some of it. I think print runs and the number of products is a very complex topic, one that's very difficult to solve. I think that Topps, they have the primary objective of catering towards the end buyers. And these are the people that are actually opening the products. In some cases, that could be us. In some cases, maybe not. Maybe we're buying, aftermarket. But catering to that end buyer is really going to drive the demand of the intermediaries, the retail stores, the hobby shops. So Not only, though, do they have to meet the forecasted demand with the amount of cards that they print, but they also have to provide value in what's opened, as what you were alluding to, the dilution of products over time, JT. So this is where the print run increases, along with manufactured scarcity. So the shimmers, the non-standard colors, the waves, the short prints that maybe aren't so short printed anymore, that's where that's necessary. So, but they can also, instead of diluting the products, the current products, they can also create more products to address the demand. This is a way to ensure that there's enough hits for everybody out there, but spreading those out across products. So they have 80, 90, I don't even know how many products they have if you count the online exclusives, but I really think it's unavoidable. I think that some amount of dilution of existing products is also unavoidable, because smart and experienced buyers like us are going to seek out the tried and true top products, the top 5 or 6 that retain their value. I think there's also a secondary goal for Topps, and that is ensuring the long-term sustainability of the hobby. So that's what you're talking about, Andy. And it looks like they're not doing that right now. It's something that is a secondary goal clearly to them. Should it be the secondary goal? I don't know. They're focusing on the needs of the end buyers today, the current demands, when they're doing their forecast models for how much they produce. But so I think all in all, though, I think Topps is doing an okay job here in fulfilling the needs and desires of current consumers, because they can't really be fully achieved without making trade-offs that could compromise the long-term sustainability of the hobby. So the current amount of products for me is good. You're hurting the newbie or novice collector or speculator if they seek out or start to buy the other products that don't retain value as well, which isn't good. But I just think it's impossible to achieve everything. The primary, secondary goal, keeping everybody happy, especially when you have the leverage that distributors have in exploiting their position in the hobby. The negatives, and you guys caught on these, like it's not all great here, because you have the rookie card variant of guys like Juan Soto, Ronald Acuna. There's just way too many out there today versus what was there in the past for somebody like Albert Pujols, Ichiro. There's more and more variants in circulation. So I don't know what happens here. Maybe in the future, maybe 10, 15 years down the line, where Juan Soto isn't necessarily more desirable than Albert Pujols anymore. Maybe with guys like Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, this latest crop, maybe people just flock to an even smaller subset. People talk about the crash in the mid-90s and the obscene amount of cards that were created, but people should really consider the relative supply of now versus then. So you have to factor in the difference of the demand in today's environment versus back then. Back then, there was a lot more demand. And like one of you said, it's impossible to calculate the print runs in the past, so it's impossible to really discern what the relative supply is anyways. You can kind of reverse engineer the print runs today, but you still don't know how many were printed in the past. So I don't know. Not all sports card recessions are going to be created equally, even though we've only seen one. I don't know if we can say that, but I guess we'll see. The next topic has to do with the influx of speculators and prospectors in today's market. Everybody seems to be looking for the next Mike Trout. There probably isn't going to be a next Mike Trout. But is this epidemic, whatever you want to call it, behavior, is this good for the hobby? Starting with you, JT.
I would say it's problematic for those who do not have experience with it prior. And what you said, Phil, is a really great point. If you go into this with the expectation that you're going to find the next Mike Trout, I think you're only setting yourself up for disappointment. And then when money gets involved, then you have financial issues with that as well. And a lot of reason people left the hobby before, if we go back to the junk wax era, a lot of people would sit on cases of 87 Topps, which today is just does not have the value of what they put into it. They got burned, and that causes resentment, which causes people to get away from the hobby. I think the investment side of it with people who are more mainstream and well-known outside of this hobby is good. It brings people in. But what's dangerous is that if people see those figures as the experts in the industry when really they're not real experts in the industry, and they take their advice, then that's also a problem. So I think that anyone who really wants to get into it needs to do their own research, do their own opinions, and look at past trends to really see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, and I would say that.
Or what about you, Andy?
Will there be another Mike Trout? Probably not. Is it fun to look for the next Mike Trout? Definitely yes. The key is I would just recommend that people don't overextend yourself. Like, I see this happened last year before the season started with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I mean, his prices were at a point where, I mean, he would have had to have gone out last year and won the MVP, I think, just to like sustain the levels that they were at. And I think a lot of people really buy into the hype. And I've gotten to the point where I don't do like a ton of prospecting with the super young guys. I like to see a guy at least play a couple of years. Somebody like an Acuna or Soto. Those are still, really young guys, but they have somewhat proven themselves. But yeah, I mean, there's probably not going to be another Mike Trout, but let's just see who's going to be the guy that takes over as the best player in baseball after Trout is done.
Got it. Yeah. So where I was thinking with speculators, with prospectors, whatever you want to call them, and it's probably unfair to generalize because I know myself, I'm a little bit of a hybrid. I have passion for collecting. I'm also somewhat of a speculator, prospector as well. But I do, like you, Andy, I try not to delve too deep into the inexperienced guys that haven't made it past AAA. So with more market participants, it's always going to be a good thing, but at what cost? So again, the speculators, prospectors, you're not going to share the same passion as collectors. And I think about the cryptocurrency market in 2017, where a lot of the speculators that were in that market, they didn't really have confidence or care about the longer term use cases, maybe the stuff that was going to happen 10, 15 years down the line, decentralized internet, based on all of these alleged roadmaps of what these cryptocurrencies said they were going to do. So when the crypto market went south a bit in late 2017, the bottom fell out. So like crypto speculators, I think that baseball card speculators could potentially be the same way in that they're a little less sticky than collectors. There's less gluing them to that community, to that hobby. Money and credit, even credit, they're both finite things. And some things I've noticed in some of the Facebook groups I'm a part of, not all of them, but a lot of people are just looking for that quick flip. A great proportion of those people in these groups that are focused on more modern sports cards aren't serious buyers. And as a matter of fact, a lot of these groups are just devoted towards razzes, where you're just buying an opportunity, a small stake, a small chance to win a card. It's almost like they can't afford 100% of the card, so they just purchase shares instead. So the vintage groups I've seen have the members seem to have a greater ability to spend. I don't know what the cause of that. I could think of a few factors, but I think real disposable income is an important variable to keep these participants in the game as well. So, but having said that, a barometer for the card market strength that I think is something that's important to look at is when you look at the 80s and 90s cards. So like a Tony Gwynn rookie card in a high PSA grade, or even like Ken Griffey Jr. upper deck in a high PSA grade. The fact that those cards are performing well, and that the fact that they've actually appreciated quite a bit over the last few years, I think that means that still a good enough proportion of collectors versus speculators in the market. Probably good enough for me. All right. So the next topic we have has to do with third-party grading companies. Namely, we're talking about PSA, Beckett's BGS service, and SGC. Do you guys think, there's a lot of stuff we could focus on here. We could talk about potential risks related to counterfeit, trimmed, or altered cards. We could talk about the rapid increase in submissions, especially that PSA and Beckett have seen for modern cards over the last few years. Do you guys see any risks with these areas? Starting with you, Andy.
Well, what I would like to see with PSA, first and foremost, I think they need to raise the prices on the lower levels, like the bulk services, because I think I think they get so overwhelmed with those bulk services and having to get those turned around that they're not taking as much time on their, the bigger cards. And I think that's kind of what's led to a lot of this stuff that is, I'm hoping anyway, that's what's led to a lot of the problems, is some of this stuff has just been, overlooked rather than, some kind of conspiracy theory of they're in on it or whatever. But that would be one of the things I would look at doing. And if you're buying, PSA, BGS, SGC graded cards, I would just try to, especially if it's a more expensive card, do your homework on that particular card, especially if it's something that's serial numbered. There's ways that you can track down, photos of that card before it was graded. And that can lessen the risk for you there.
What about you, JT?
There's a lot to unpack there. And I would say that the third-party graders, people are probably a little too harsh on them from what I have seen. Has there been some controversy this year? Unquestionable. And some of the responses by those who are higher ups with them has also been somewhat questionable. But it seems that there's a lot of demand in terms of people want quicker turnaround times on the bulk submissions. They are upset that PSA has upped their bulk submission rates here to start the new year. And I feel that they've upped those rates, and specifically people were complaining about at the National this past year that they upped the rates for their service where you could actually pick up your cards at some point during the show, which is a service where they have to have a very quick turnaround with that, and the prices were high so that they didn't become overwhelmed, or they could actually make sure that they gave their guarantee with that. So I feel it is a way to kind of price people out, and also at the same time try to prevent people from sending in cards that shouldn't be slabbed. I know that that's a very subjective thing overall, but there's a lot that they do for this, and their requirements to even get in there. For example, a PSA looking at their job requirements, if they have an opening for a grader, usually you're looking at someone who has had 3 years experience or more in a third-party grading setting. And even that is incredibly vague. I don't know exactly what that means. Does that mean they have past experience with BGS? How does someone new get into that profession or that career path? That to me is pretty interesting. How do you even get started with that and actually build up a portfolio where you can say you have the experience to do that as well? So there's a lot of different things there. I would just say that you need to do your homework on this. Is it nice to have the word of PSA or a BGS? Yes, they are technically still the experts in this, and they do have legitimate experience in doing it. But you should also value your own opinion and do your own homework and not solely rely on them to make an informed decision as a consumer, collector, investor, whatever you classify yourself as.
All strong points there. Personally, I'm not too concerned about the trimming alteration scandals. I probably was in the past, but based on what happened to sales during that period where things got real dicey in the middle of 2019, I think it's maybe more of an issue for vintage cards where you get more of those exponential price increases from one grade to the next. So you get really that ROI from a trimmer perspective. And it's definitely something that's been happening for a long time. It also pains me to say that I'm okay with the current lack of transparency that all of these current grading companies have us, because I'm not okay with it. But yeah, I don't think it negatively affects the card market in a material way. Counterfeit cards, I could see it being more of an issue in the future, maybe with advancements in 3D printing, as the card markets continue to boom across all sports. Where the money is, so do the scammers go. So Beckett, I think, probably needs to make some strides in improving their slabs like PSA did from a tamper-proof perspective. But where I think the greatest issue is, and JT, you touched upon this, was the rapid increase of submissions. To me, that's very concerning. And I said this a little bit earlier, but not all card recessions need to be created equally. So some could, and this with other markets, some recessions have been caused by inflated valuations. And you could even argue that this is a supply-related concern too, because it affects the supply, not of all cards that were printed, but of slab cards. I don't know. I have the unpopular opinion. I think maybe JT, you might agree with me actually on this, but I think PSA should have increased bulk rates higher than 50 cents. That only affected certain individuals. That wasn't across everybody. I think that $2 again per card at the lowest rate for bulk prices would have been acceptable, because I'm just worried about the ability to support the current price levels with some of the slab cards on the low end stuff, the $5 rock cards that are getting submitted, the 1990 score, whatever, Frank Thomas rookies. I looking back like 5 years ago when I got back into the hobby hard, I saw that maybe 10 to 15% of all modern cards that were worth like $5 raw were getting submitted. And now it's probably closer to 40 to 50% of cards like greater than $5. You see at the National, there's so many cards and slabs. So I know the hobby's strong, but can a $10 plus jump really be justified across all these cards that are getting submitted? So it seems like today a lot of the PSA 10s are going for at least $10 more than what the rock card equivalent would be going for if it's in a 10. So I just think we're going to need to see some sort of adjustment here. And I think that a larger price increase by PSA on some on the bulk rates would be a quicker way to get there. So next, we're going to talk about the advent of group breaking. It's gotten really hot across all sports. It's attracted probably a lot of the speculators, prospector types, maybe some collectors as well. Is this a positive or a negative factor for the health of the sports card market? Starting with you, JT.
I've been joining group breaks for about 7 years now, and definitely don't do it as heavily as I used to. Now I will only do a few a year, but in the middle part of this past decade, I was really heavily into it. And what I've noticed now is that a lot of break rooms, the way that they will divide it up, will be a way where you basically pay by tier for a team or a player. So with this, with now, for example, if we look at basketball, there's a premium to pay for the Pelicans because of Zion Williamson. And there are several other good rookies in there too, but the actual distribution of how much each team costs is very much allocated towards these certain teams. And usually you're talking about the ballers who can really only afford to get a chance to get these. If you also look at it too, there is a lot of people who are trying to do the card breaks out there. And there's a middleman in between how they get their product and how it is sent out from a Topps or a Panini. So those companies will send it out to a distributor who will then allocate it to the various breakers out there. So you see a lot of these large cases or large group case break rooms that might get 200 cases of a really popular product, such as a Topps Chrome baseball or a National Treasures football, whereas the smaller guys who don't bring in as much money for them probably only going to get a couple. Some don't even get full cases anymore. They can get individual boxes. And these middlemen are also able to kind of raise the price up beyond the suggested retail price as well. And we've seen that kind of with the prisms and just the speculation around the rise of the rookie card. And kind of Panini has combated that recently by using the Dutch auction system that Andy's talked about in a few of his videos with Prism. So really what it's doing overall is it's creating more and more of a paywall and a premium for people to be able to access the products themselves. And I think that's turned a lot of people away from wax, which is not a good thing. People need to open wax in order for these cards to reach the market in the first place, not just have it stored away or just be too expensive where no one's willing to take the risk and potentially lose the cost of the box because there's not enough in it because it's too diluted. So there's a lot of issues there that I just mentioned, but a lot of it is just the huge spike exponentially in suggested retail price from what the boxes should be going for to what the middlemen are selling them for.
What about you, Andy?
So I think if you're a person that collects and buys singles, I think the group breakers provide a great service. And if you're a person that wants to break hobby boxes, then kind of like to JT's point, you probably hate them because the prices on hobby boxes have gone through the roof to the point where a lot of people can't really afford to break hobby boxes anymore. Just as an example, in the basketball card market, like Optic Basketball started off last year at $80 a hobby box, and this year it's like at $320. And I mean, it's, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I've never personally been a group break person, but I do see the benefits as far as getting the singles out there. And then also, if you're a person that likes to collect sealed wax and hold on to it for the future, they do you a great service because the more and more of it they open, the less unopened product is going to be out there. And if you're holding on to some of it, that's only going to increase in value.
All good points there. Like you, Andy, I haven't done a whole lot with group breaking myself. I think I did it once, and it was trying to hunt for Wander Franco, and I did not get Wander Franco. And you guys are spot on from what I can see. It's creating the market for people like us to have those entry points to get the singles later. So they're creating that liquidity. And in the buying of singles for us, is mostly isolated from whatever they're doing on driving up the prices of wax side on the breaking part of the business. So pretty much we're unaffected by the cost of sealed wax that they've created. As somebody who breaks, I guess the risk for them would be you're paying commission twice because you're paying an upcharge to break, and then the breaker also has to buy from distributor, usually not from Tops. So there's a commission there. Of course, you have as we know, the ROI might not always be the best when opening product. So it's the really the key is the amount of disposable income and the rate of new entrants into the breaking community. If that can grow at a rate that's faster than the money that's lost by the people that are breaking, then I think it is a good thing. Next topic. This one's an interesting one. Topps has had the exclusive license on the baseball side for quite some time, over a decade now. What do you guys think is more conducive to a healthy baseball card market? Having multiple licensed manufacturers or just having Topps? Starting with you, Andy.
Oh, I think multiple licenses is way better. I mean, I think competition is always a good thing. When you're the only product in town, I mean, you just kind of see what happens. Like I don't know how many products they put out each year now, but it's gotten to this incredibly high level. And a lot of it is, it's basically the same stuff. You'll see them use a lot of the same photos in different products and stuff like that, which is very repetitive. And I mean, I just think competition is key in anything. So yeah, I hate to see monopolies like this.
JT.
There is a huge difference in being able to have a license to produce this product and having the exclusive license. And with that, it's to hold that exclusive license, Topps has to put out so many products, and you guys know which ones. They sit on the shelves for a long time, and it's because they probably should have been put out, and they have them in so many different formats. Now, I've seen the same Topps Heritage mega boxes in Walmart since March now, and it is January, and that's not good. And like at Target, I see Topps Fire still on the shelves, and that's been there since July or August, and not a lot of it has been touched. And back before Topps had that exclusive license, it wasn't the case like that. You would have a release every so often, and it would build anticipation in between each one. Now there's a new product coming out every week, and it is incredibly hard to keep pace with it. It's incredibly hard to keep track. And you were talking about this earlier, Phil, is that there are so many different variants of the rookie cards out there, which a lot of people are chasing, that a lot of them are probably going to get lost in the shuffle. Is a Topps Fire Pete Alonso rookie really going to be as coveted 5 years down the road? I really don't think a lot of these products that maybe are retail exclusives or aren't the big ones that we always go to, as much as I like them and I enjoy them, just based on the way that I collect, I don't really see them holding as much value, and that could potentially dissuade some people in the future. So yes, competition, so that it takes the pressure off of Topps, and we get competition to drive better quality products that produce better boxes, so we get better ROI. And that goes back to the breaking of boxes, so that people are more encouraged to actually open boxes and not feel like they're about to be shafted for $80 when they go to do so.
Right.
You guys are both spot on. I agree 100%. As Andy said, usually competition is good in any industry, and there's really no exception here. It's going to give you price competition. It's going to give you forced innovation. I know people in the YouTube community have complained about Topps taking away etching. It would only be a good thing. At first, a counterpoint could be, well, what if that increases the print runs even further and the products even more? And you guys covered that. That wouldn't be the case, because there wouldn't be unmet demand, because Panini or whoever else would be out there with that license would be fulfilling that. Next topic, the future of e-commerce. Probably something that won't get any less regulated anytime soon. Over the past year, we've seen eBay sales tax affecting almost every state, except for the states that don't have sales tax. We've seen increased postage costs. We're going to see those again in January of this year. What do you guys think about the future of e-commerce and how that will affect the sports card market? Starting with you, JT.
As someone who sets up at shows, it is something that I've been able to use heavily to my advantage. And I've seen this too with a lot of sports card dealers who maybe deal off of the eBay platform or similar platforms where shipping isn't a necessity, is that they're able to use those shipping costs and those sales tax costs to their advantage. So what I think you'll see more of is in-person card transactions. People will be more inspired to go to shows. And I'm not just saying that as someone who will regularly set up at shows. I just believe that they would rather save that money, or if they're going to spend it, they would rather spend it with the little guys instead of the bigger corporations as well. Personally, recently I've started shipping out cards PWE style, and I make it very clear in the listings when I do it on eBay that this will be PWE. And I've had people message me that they're happy that I'm doing it that way. Up there still, there's player collectors, team collectors who are chasing these cards that the shipping has become worth more than the card itself, and that becomes problematic where there's really no reason for them to go pick up the single that's worth maybe 50 cents when they have to pay $5, four of which is going to USPS, and then 50 cents is going to whatever state they reside in for sales tax as well. So I think overall you'll see a lot more of transactions that don't necessarily go through the major platforms. And hopefully if that creates some competition, that the e-commerce might not be as strictly regulated, although I would doubt it at this point.
All good stuff. What about you, Andy? What do you think there?
I think JT made a lot of good points there. Like, especially, I mean, just being on eBay for, as many years as I have, I've seen like a tremendous difference in like the lower end stuff. You don't see a lot of that lower end stuff selling at auctions anymore. Generally, people are going to have to bundle that stuff together, and I think that's one of the things that's made COMC a lot more popular for stuff like that recently. And then, like JT said, like in-person shows, because it just doesn't make sense on the shipping and on the higher end stuff. The sales tax is kind of, it's been a pretty big detriment, I think, to a lot of people too, because you're looking at, if you spend $1,500 on a card, you're going to pay another $150, $200 in sales tax on top of that. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to impact it some, for sure.
I definitely see a big impact, but I see this as more of a concern that we can do nothing about. Well, I don't see it as that. I see it as more as an opportunity to transform. So, and I've been affected by it. I'm someone who does a lot of buying and selling through eBay, as both of you guys do. It's been my primary platform. I set up at shows, but I find that the market that eBay provides is greater than the reach I have at some of the local shows I do. But this has recently changed with the changes of 2019. I have recently reached out to the guy that runs my shows, asking, instead of me doing it once a month, can I do it once every couple weeks instead? I'm trying to evolve a bit. My first Instagram transaction last month, I think. It's something I plan on using more often. And there's also a lot of threats to eBay right now. You have StockX, who in the sneaker market, at least with used sneakers, they've put enough pressure on eBay where eBay has dropped sales commissions on used sneakers to keep that market share. They're also in the sports card market, although maybe not as they haven't penetrated as far. And then you have COMC. COMC recently launched their first ever auction, and the knock on them, at least from my perspective, was they never had an app that was intuitive and easy to use and addictive. Well, guess what? They have an app in beta testing. So I think the market's going to transform here. I don't think we should be too concerned yet in this area. The next topic, the basketball market. Luka has created a ridiculous amount of craze. Basketball is different. It's a lot more international than baseball. Andy is the biggest expert here with basketball. Is the basketball card market a threat to the baseball card market, Andy?
I would argue that it's past it a long time ago. But here's the thing that I think a lot of people, especially in the YouTube card community, probably don't realize, because there's not a lot of like big time basketball card channels on YouTube. Most of the big time basketball card collectors are mostly on like Instagram and platforms like that. But I was talking to a buddy earlier who's a big 90s card collector, and he's done deals with people all over the world basketball card wise. And he said the thing that really kicked this off for a lot of these overseas collectors was the 1992 Dream Team. And ever since then, like the basketball card market, I mean, it's such a global thing. I mean, just think about the population in a place like China, for instance, where there's really very few people that are collecting baseball cards, but a lot of them, and they have deep pockets that are collecting basketball. I mean, if you look at, I'll just use this as an example from a set from the 90s, the 97 precious metal gems, the green cards. You guys kind of familiar with those a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
So like, we'll take a football card, like a Barry Sanders from that set. I think it like one sold earlier this year for like 13,000. And he's probably the best player in that set, one of the best players of all time. Where in basketball, a Penny Hardaway, who's kind of like one of those mid-tier stars, I mean, one recently sold in a 6 for 30,000. And, Griffey, I think the first year they did baseball was 98. And I think at Griffey, it's probably, I mean, it's going to be less than probably 10,000, I would say. Whereas, some of those mid-tier stars are going to sell as, what the top level baseball guys do. But yeah, like you said, the global market, to me, it just makes all the difference in the world. And I don't really know that that's going to spill over into baseball. I think what appeals to young people a lot is a basketball game. You can watch it in a couple hours. Baseball game, you're looking at 3.5, 4 hours. Same with football. And kids nowadays just don't have that attention span like what we did as kids, because there's just so many options and they like the fast pace and everything. So I don't know. I don't see it spilling over to baseball, but I mean, we'll see.
What about you, JT?
I think the lack of stars in baseball is something big. And I've used this analogy with a few people before, but when we look at players who are very popular to collect, I like to equate it to this cult of celebrity where they are like these pro wrestler, larger than life caricatures of themselves. So LeBron James, every single detail about LeBron James is so defined and so overblown. And his personality really shines through. Like we know a lot more about him personally, and you really don't get as much of that with baseball. And a lot of times when players show their personalities, a lot of people complain about it. And I don't see nearly as much criticism in sports such as football and basketball. There's the whole no fun league in football and people advocating for touchdown celebrations to be allowed, which is now okay. But in baseball, someone does a bat flip and you have a very large vocal audience who are against that and this traditionalist. And I love what baseball has done with branding themselves of the whole let the kids play thing back in the start of the postseason. I think that's an excellent, especially with the kind of infusion of young talent they've had in recent years, which is, I don't think will be historic, is that we'll look back in the 2010s and that influx of talent. And there are so many guys in there that you can market into these superstars, these larger than life characters that we see in the NFL and the NBA, people who we can actually connect to as consumers, collectors, whatever part of it that you fall into. But baseball, it seems to be collecting is more so based on skill rather than based on maybe personality. I know that some of the biggest personalities are some of the best players in other sports. So yes, definitely basketball has that advantage. And I just think it's because there's more basketball players we can relate to than baseball players.
Yeah, I know, Mike Trout. Where's your personality? Jeez.
Yeah.
I defer to the experts here. I think it's a bit too early to tell whether or not it's a threat. As Andy brings up a good point, it's probably not too much of an opportunity, if any at all. We'll see how many baseball collectors, speculators flock over that we end up losing, and if there's anything in return in the next coming months, years. Next topic. So we are now in an election year, and the stock market has been generally on the rise over the last, greater part of the last decade. The economy is a factor that often affects other industries within it. What do you guys think either the stock market or the general economy has, if any, effect on the smaller sports card market? Starting with you, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to play a big role. I mean, I think it always has, though. I don't think that's really anything new, but yeah, like you said, we've been on a pretty good roll with the economy for, a good decade now. And it's like anything, all good things probably come to an end at a certain point, and it's really cyclical. So I would expect there to be some kind of, downturn at a certain point. And I think the things that will probably be hurt the most are going to be probably some of the products that are maybe not as popular anyway. Those will probably become less popular. And I think people are still going to collect though. Like, I think a lot of people think, if there's some kind of recession, that the collecting market's just going to have like this free fall. And I don't really believe that. I mean, I think it's just like anything else. It's cyclical, and there's going to be highs and lows throughout, the years and decades.
What about you, JT?
I think that even at this point, the hobby has evolved to the point where a recession wouldn't be detrimental in terms of who can collect, because if all the other factors that we talk about continue to play out the way that they do, and the base card continues to be devalued, and all of these products are released continuously, that's going to make a lot of cards that are cheap affordable, or even more affordable than they already are. And there's still going to be a way to collect. It's just not going to be as much as people would probably like. And I think that the people who are collecting the Topps Transcendence, the Topps Luminaries, the Topps Definitives, the Topps Dynasties, all of these high-end products that there seem to be more and more of them every year. Those really high-end cards, the people who have the money to buy those cards will not really be affected by a recession. So if anything, the recession is going to kind of force those middle tier cards where someone who has a lower budget tries to save up for that specific card. Those are going to be a little less obtainable, but the common cards will become even more common. The rare cards will become even more rare. So it's just going to kind of further make that divide, which there's pros and cons to that, but I think that's a separate discussion.
Yeah, I definitely think it's linked to some extent. And some people might consider modern sports cards to be a commodity, in the sense where it's an alternate store of wealth and it might actually appreciate when the economy goes south. I don't believe that. I think that certain vintage cards, rookie cards of Hall of Famers, certain cards, not all, of course, 1952 Mantle, but some of the vintage cards might fall into the commodity category. But modern cards in all sports, whether you call them or consider them an alternative asset or not, they're not a consumer staple. They're a luxury item, and luxury items are often more volatile than stocks and bonds. So there's definitely a certain amount of risk here, I feel. Unlike JT's thinking, I think it could potentially affect more than just a subset of the modern cards. But as you pointed out, Andy, everything is cyclical. Every market's cyclical. You always need a period of underperformance to get a period of above average performance or positive performance. And stocks and bonds do the same thing. With bonds, they might not always be pretty, but institutional investors like pensions, insurance companies, banks invest a majority of their portfolio often in bonds or fixed income securities. So I definitely see some risk here, though. And in a counter argument, some people I've heard say this on forums and stuff. In 2009, during the last major economic downturn, people argue that baseball cards, modern baseball cards, weren't affected much. But what I would argue is that baseball cards at that point, modern baseball cards, were at the very early part of their own business cycle, the early upswing, where they're already so close to a bottom that they couldn't have been affected that much anyways. And it's very different now. We've been in a bull market for a number of years. And with the election year, there's definitely, I think this year is a little bit different, where there's a greater amount of certainty in the outcome. And that could be just my personal belief, but I think this is probably helping the stock market right now, as well as some of the more recent moves of the Fed. So I see some good signs with the broader economy. All right, so next subject. This one's a little bit different. This has to do with any practices that we use to either manage or mitigate our exposures to baseball card risk. Starting with you, Andy.
I think it's kind of like I said before, like one of the things that I would try to do is I mean, I try not to get too heavy into any one particular player if I'm looking at it from a value perspective. I mean, if it's like, you know, PC stuff, like, I mean, I collect Russell Westbrook, so, you know, I'm not as concerned with, like, you know, the value of those cards long term. But if it's something I'm looking at long term, like Acuna's, like I have a couple of higher end Acuna's, and I probably won't be adding, you know, too much more, just because you know, you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket, no matter, because I mean, we've all seen the surefire prospects and young players fail before. Like there's no, you know, there's no guarantee with anyone. So that would kind of be my advice.
What about you, JT?
I think there's two schools of thought here. So with every card that you own, you have a monetary value that's assigned to it and a sentimental value. So what the card means to you and what you value it. So in terms of the monetary side, which is seemingly what more and more people turn towards, I would say just consider what is the true ceiling on this player. And if you believe that the ceiling is Mike Trout, temper your expectations, because it's not. That's just not as realistic as you think. What is a realistic outcome? And kind of the way that I view it is that anytime that I put money into a certain player for my inventory as a dealer, I assume that that card will be worthless as soon as I buy it, that no one would ever pay a penny for it again. That's kind of an extreme way of thinking, but at the end of the day, I don't attach monetary value to it where I need to actually get something out of it. If you're looking at it, like for example, this year's Bowman draft, it's good to know the cycles in the hobby. So generally there's a decline in between when a player's first release in Bowman draft until the next year's Bowman draft. There's kind of a continual decline until they're getting ready to be called up, usually the spring training before they're going to get called up. From there, it's as soon as they make their debut and their rookies start coming out, that's kind of a peak. And then depending on how they do from there, it will go up or down. A lot of times it goes down, especially up through their second year in the league. So some of the guys who are really hot from that really good 2018 class who are kind of down right now, really good time to buy on them, because that can help you. So knowing the trends and what has worked for past players is good on the monetary side. On the sentimental side, I super collect Miguel Cabrera. And there are a lot of cards in my collection that I think just look really cool, and I assign a lot of value to them, even though they might be $2 cards, but I like them more than some of the $50 autographs that I have, or they were given to me by someone, or I remember where I got them or how I got them. So I attach those value to those cards, and they have that greater value to me. So I don't think anybody out there likes to think that they've made a foolish decision when they bought a card. I think everybody likes to think like, yeah, I made a good buy on this. Otherwise, why would you do it? That would be kind of counterproductive to your collecting. So to me, with that, I've attached that value to that card. It means a lot to me for those reasons, and it's something that I've been able to connect with. A lot of people who are trying to collect these next big things, I mean, how many people who have a Soto PC, in all honesty, have watched more than 2 Juan Soto games outside of maybe the World Series? Probably very few. Mm-hmm. And we have YouTube now to kind of watch highlights, or MLB is on all different social media platforms as well, where you can connect more with these players. They have profiles themselves on social media platforms, or you can get a better insight into them. But if you're really looking to get into someone or invest in someone, there are so many ways that are at your fingertips to kind of learn more about them. You know, learn about who their actual character is, learn about their skill set. Why do you collect them? And those are kind of questions that you have to kind of answer for yourself. Why do you like this player? Why are you so attracted to collecting this player's cards? I think if you can answer that and truthfully tell yourself that and kind of build that relationship, you don't have to meet the player or anything. I feel that you can really get to know a player these days without ever having to meet them face to face. But if you build that, I think that will add a lot more value to your collection, especially if you're someone who is more so looking to collect than resell.
That was deep. Wow.
That was good.
First of all, I look at the allocation of singles that I own versus sealed wax. I need sealed wax because I have a business that requires it. So I'm always going to have a certain amount on hand. And sealed wax has less downside volatility, one would argue, versus singles. We could probably talk about that in its own episode. But another thing I do is I look at the overall amount that I spend versus the rest of my assets. Not suggesting everybody should do this, but also not suggesting that there's a hard Stern formula that I'm using. I look at the 401k, the Roth 401, the IRAs, the real estate I own, and I'm always thinking about that. Another thing I do is, as someone who sells a lot, rotating my inventory in and out very frequently. So I try to lock in that gain, not get too greedy. I might average probably 6 months for the baseball cards that I own. It hurts the margins, but it's also ensuring and locking in a profit. In 2014, when I first started to get back into the hobby hard, I got burnt a few times on that player-specific risk, holding certain players for too long. Another thing I do, I look at my players, and I don't assign risk scores, but in my head, I know who's on the extreme ends of the most risky versus the least risky. In one of my recent speculation series episodes, I brought up Luis Arias. This is a guy that some of us here might like, but he doesn't have really any history of hitting for power. He's been in the minor leagues for a very long time. He plays for the Twins. So there's players like that. There's also other ones, prospects. Wander Franco would fall into this category. At one point, I would say that Ronald Acuna and Juan Soto did as well, but somebody brought up earlier in this episode, they've shown major league ability for longer than one season, which is great. So what I'm trying to get to is I look not to overexpose myself to very risky players. I don't really buy too many prospects or invest or flip too many prospects. Usually most of the guys have some sort of track record. I also try to allocate a certain percentage to guaranteed Hall of Fame lock type players. Mike Trout could be one of those. Right now, we're looking at between a 30 to 50% allocation to Mike Trout, which you might not see because in my speculation series, I'm talking about other types of players, but I figured it would be important to publicize that information, probably in this video. And another thing, the last thing I do is lately I've been diversifying myself into buying some basketball. Started with sealed wax. I'm sure, Andy, you appreciate this.
Oh, yeah.
But I just think from a risk perspective, it certainly makes sense. The next topic and the final topic is how each one of us would assess or rate the overall health of the baseball card market heading into 2020. So this is the modern baseball card market heading into 2020. How do we feel it is in terms of strength on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the strongest? Starting with you, JT.
I'll put it at a 4. So we are in a real high point for great young talent. And in recent years, I would say if you look at how many 100 loss teams we have here, it has been very centralized to a certain pool of teams, and we all know which teams those are. And I feel that at some point in time here, probably within the next few years, like we're looking at we'll name Mookie Betts, Chris Bryant, Francisco Lindor, some of these guys who came out in the mid part of this past decade who will be on other teams. And the chances are that some of these smaller market teams actually go out and try to get some of these guys, I think is a lot higher than a lot of people are expecting, or that they could move to these at some point. So we'll see a bigger shift in balance. And I think that's what really keeps people interested in baseball. If their team has something to play for, or the player that they root for has something to play for, that is going to add a lot more interest to it. I think part of the Mike Trout, why people aren't as Trout, I think, should be collected more than he is, in all honesty. And part of that is because the Angels have not really put anyone around him, and he doesn't have that many signature moments to him. There's a few that we can recall. People remember the postseason. People remember those late season moments. And where is Mike Trout at that time? He's not playing baseball, and that's concerning when your superstars are not necessarily the ones who are on the field. And we've seen a lot of injury, especially on the pitcher side of things. I know people have strayed away a lot from pitchers because Tommy John every week with someone blowing out their arm. And I think overall there's a lot of options, and there's pros and cons with that, but I definitely think the pros outweigh the cons. Where options are good, it creates interest, it creates more opportunities for different types of collectors to embrace a hobby in their own unique way. So I'll give it a 4 out of 5, room for improvement, but overall better than we were 10 years ago.
Andy, what do you think?
I'm going to say we're at a 4 with the potential of a 5 this coming season. And I would say that we have a chance of getting to a 5 if like the players like Acuna and Soto, if they continue to improve, and then we also see this new crop of guys, the Franco, the Vlad Guerrero, Eloy Jimenez. If we see some of these guys, these guys that are coming up like super young, if we see these guys continue to succeed, I think we're going to be at, a 5 pretty quickly this next season.
Got it. Well, I'm at a 3.5. So I guess it rounds up to 4. But overall, my sentiment's bullish. As I mentioned earlier when we talked about print runs, I think there's a lot of print runs in products, but I think Topps is doing at least an okay job of balancing the trade-offs in meeting the demands of current consumers with the long-term sustainability of the hobby. There's some risks that are unavoidable, like the aging and shrinking population of baseball fans, which we talked about a little bit earlier in passing. But the two biggest indicators I look at to assess the health of the hobby are the amount of money that's in the hobby, which is clearly evident if you look at eBay comps and just sort by highest price items over the last 90 days. And there's clearly a lot of money being spent. And then I also look at my other indicator is the total amount of people that are in the hobby, which was evident at the National, which is evident on YouTube and on social media groups, etc. The attendance was, of course, very impressive at 2019's National in Chicago. I definitely see some risks, but I definitely see a lot to look forward to. And I don't see any signs of it turning around anytime soon. I think 2020 is going to be another year where I'm going to be very bullish. All right, guys. So that is it for the episode. Hopefully you guys liked what you saw. I'm going to be linking Andy and JT's channels below in the description. And 2020 is going to be a good one. Take care, guys. Filmington, She Blinded Me with Refractors, and Triple Crown 24 out.
All right. Thanks, guys.